Hello, everyone. Welcome in. In this video, we are going to be discussing day one of testimony in the Donna Adelson trial. If you are unaware of the events that have led us to this trial, we are here because in 2014, Florida State University law professor Dan Markell was gunned down in the garage of his home. Investigators quickly determined that this wasn't a random attack, but eventually realized it was a murder for hire. The motive centered on a very bitter custody battle with his ex-wife, Wendi Adelson, who wanted to relocate their children down to South Florida to live closer to her family. Prosecutors allege that the members of the Adelson family, led by the matriarch, Donna Adelson, who is currently on trial, and her son, Charlie, who was previously convicted, arranged for the killing of Dan Markell to basically solve their custody problem with Wendi Adelson's children and the divorce and custody battle happening between her and Dan Markell. They allegedly funneled money to two men, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera, through Charlie's girlfriend at the time, Catherine Magbanois, who acted as the conduit for this murder for hire. Over the past decade, all four of them have been convicted and sentenced, leaving Donna on trial and Wendi to possibly come. A lot of today is going to focus on things that really may impact Wendi, because what happened in the first day of trial, I think, is way more significant for Wendi Adelson than Donna Adelson, who is currently on trial. And we will get into that here now. I saw this photo of Wendi Adelson waiting outside of court under subpoena for the state yesterday, and I thought it was very interesting. As you'll notice, she does have some documents, a folder. She's coming prepared, which is very telling for what is to come in the future when it comes to not only Donna's trial, but what could be happening for Wendi. Because yesterday was explosive, in my opinion, as to incriminating Wendi, but wasn't strong enough to absolve Donna of any participation in this murder for hire. So really, it was just a big issue for the Adelson family what came of Luis Rivera's cross-examination yesterday. It's becoming ever clear that Donna Adelson's attorney's goal is to throw Wendi Adelson under the bus, which, makes a little more clear why Wendi Adelson was so insistent on quashing the subpoena served on her by the defense in this case. Wendi Adelson did not want to and will not have to testify on behalf or for the defense in any way in this case. She will only be testifying under her use and derivative use immunity given to her by the state. So nothing Wendi says on the stand, if it uncovers new evidence or gives new light into charges that can be brought against Wendi, can be used to bring charges against Wendi. Clearly, Wendi is scared of charges being brought against her. The situation isn't good for anyone in the family because the circumstantial evidence is what convicted Charlie. It is just the rest of the dominoes falling. If this evidence is strong enough to convict one, it's strong enough to convict all. And Wendi also has extra evidence against her specifically that looks worse than even when used in Charlie's trial, just to give that circumstantial connection and reason for why he would do the murder for hire. Wendi has all the direct evidence of the anger and the angst and the desire to get away from Dan Markell and Tallahassee, enough that you would think it could be potentially thought of to have to kill him to get their way. And with that, Wendi Adelson has a law degree. She understands the law. She understands certain things that maybe she has tried to shield herself with in order to hope that she would be the most protected in this case, the one with the least amount of phone calls or incriminating evidence against her in regards to connections to the conversations that Charlie and Donna had when planning this murder for hire, so to speak. And to my eyes, I think it could be really played out in front of the jury for Wendi Adelson that, of course, she tried to shield herself, but no one is above the law, in the sense that just because you have a legal mind, it doesn't mean you're going to get away with a murder for hire. You can try and cover yourself in all these ways, but once you go back and look at all the ways that she's tried to cover herself, it's going to look rather suspicious. It's going to look, in my opinion, like an attorney who's trying to get away with a crime, who knows a little bit more than their co-defendants and tried to make sure anyone else can get in trouble for this except them. So with that, we have to get into the witnesses very quick because they already got through, I believe it's 6 witnesses, and it's the last witness of the day, Luis Rivera, who was explosive for Donna and more so for Wendi. We quickly moved through witnesses because, as you can see, there really was no cross-examination of these first witnesses. The first, James Geiger, the neighbor of Dan Markel, who was quick to the scene, who saw and heard essentially what happened. He didn't see the shot, but he saw the Prius backing down the driveway quickly, noticed that Dan Markel didn't leave, thought it was suspicious, and went and investigated, and ultimately was the one who got the authorities involved quickly and got Dan Markel the medical attention he needed, even though it was not enough to save his life. And you can really feel the genuine, just human qualities coming from this neighbor. He's a great witness to start with because you just trust him and you feel like, wow, this is a tragedy that happened in this wholesome neighborhood. Who would try to have this evil befall someone? And why would they do that? And that's where we get to the custody battle and everything unraveling about the Adelsons after this. We have witness number 2, David Sims, who was the police sergeant, the first on the scene, who saw Dan Markel in his, trauma state. He was shot twice in the head, but was still conscious to some degree. He could not speak or talk, but was moaning, and his head was moving back and forth. And that is what was witnessed by the police sergeant, who ultimately opened the door of Dan Markel's vehicle and was the first one to take any action as far as a state actor. He was quick on the stand, just explained what he saw, and then we moved on to the forensic specialist, Joanne Maltese, who took the photos that they were introducing into evidence, which we will get into on the next slides here. But first, we'll quickly talk about Dr. Clark, the medical examiner. He has over 8,000 autopsies and is the one who ruled this a homicide. He was not cross-examined. Witness number 5 is the very lovable Detective Isom. He has received pushback and criticism in regards to his initial interview with Wendi Adelson. I actually think that good legal minds can take what could be considered a loss and make it a win if you know what to do with it. So I am not mad at Detective Isom's actions, despite I understanding the criticism of him just kind of going easy on Wendi. But sometimes when you don't have probable cause, you don't think that someone has committed this and you can't actually get there yet, just letting them talk and sit in that room for 5 hours with you under the guise of just talking and trying to figure it out while the potential criminal is actually, giving information in some way. Everything's information. So I'm one who disagrees with the criticisms of Detective Isom. They found Wendi at her lunch with her friends very quickly and got her to go with the police to this little, discussion. And that, I think, deserves the credit. He was good on the stand. He had a very weak cross by the male attorney on Donna Adelson's team. We'll get into our reviews of the attorneys, and this cross-examination basically didn't do anything. I saw little smirks, kind of like the little gleam in his eye from Detective Isom, knowing that this was going to be nothing every time the defense attorney asked him a question. And then essentially Georgia Kappelman got back up and redirected and wiped the floor with the very weak cross-examination done by the defense of Detective Isom. So then they move on to the last witness of the day, Luis Rivera, who was crossed and was crossed with intent by the female attorney for Donna Adelson. There was a plan, there was a paint by numbers strategy, but I believe it could have fallen on its face based on how the attorney did this. Essentially, on cross examination of Luis Rivera, Donna Adelson's female attorney went up there and tried to distance Luis Rivera from Donna Adelson. And he did say, and I don't know this lady, like this wasn't my contact. I know that we're trying to get the kids back for Wendi, which is a good thing for Donna in this trial. The issue is, though, that the attorney basically muddled the big gotcha moment that she could have had because she did this whole paint by numbers strategy with Luis Rivera. And she did not have to pull the curtain open on that. She did not have to be saying, I asked you to put a 1 here and a 2 here and a 3 here and an X on Donna and her husband Harvey. She essentially is saying, I made this list for you and told you to map this out and put Donna not anywhere near this plot, which the state is still going to be able to destroy because they have constantly put this train car theory in to the trials against the Adelsons. They say everyone had a specific points of contact, and you can decipher that from the evidence in all the subpoenas for all the conversations that they got. The ones that they didn't have were likely deleted before they were able to get this information, potentially on other apps and things like that. But from what they have and can tell, there would be no necessary connection between Luis Rivera and Donna Adelson. So I think the attorney had an all right idea by trying to make something out of nothing, because when you have no evidence, you have to do something like this paint by numbers game here with Luis Rivera, give him a crayon and have him go to town. But with that, it doesn't really do much if there's a bright enough person on the jury, if it strikes someone on the jury to say, but she kept saying I asked him to do that. And it's not enough to undercut all the other incriminating evidence against Donna Adelson that she could have participated in this. Mostly her reaction to the bump by the undercover law enforcement officer and how she immediately called Charlie and said they're going to probably have to pay up with using the key term of a TV, which was alleged by the state to be the code for this murder and the murder for hire plot. So I think that the biggest moment that the defense attorney had actually fell short for Donna, because it isn't enough to prove that Donna didn't have anything to do with this. It just proved that she never talked to Luis Rivera. And the more interesting and important part of this is that he named Wendi Adelson as the person who was pushing and driving all of this. Now, that is huge for the state. If I was Georgia Cappleman, I would have had to been hiding my smile as soon as he said that, because you can't automatically admit his testimony in a trial against Wendi Adelson. You can't say, did you say this? You can't have hearsay come in. But what you can do is question Luis Rivera about what he just said in Donna Adelson's trial and point to Wendi as the number one person driving this. Luis Rivera has put that on record. If he says anything to the contrary in a trial against Wendi now, he can be impeached, and then they could bring in his statements from this trial just yesterday and show that he says Wendi Adelson did this. So if I was the state, I would be jumping for joy that he said this openly in trial, because Wendy's protecting herself. But anything brought up about her now can be further used to impeach these witnesses in the trial against Wendi Adelson to get the information out that points that Wendi was the main driving factor in all of this. And with that, we will just get to some of the evidence that was presented and Donna Adelson's reaction, which was extremely inappropriate, in my opinion, and we will finish this up. Here is a picture of Donna Adelson from in court yesterday with what I consider, my opinion, some crocodile tears and her reaction to the graphic nature of the images and the facts being presented as to Dan Markel's tragic and long-suffering death. He did not die quickly. Now, I didn't actually see any tears fall from Donna Adelson, and that's just from my observation. She potentially could be putting on some kind of act to make it look like she's traumatized by this, horrible murder of her daughter's ex-husband. But that reaction is extremely undercut by the facts that will be presented as to her and her family's reaction and actions taken after Dan Markel's death, and the disrespect for his death and his family and the connection he should still have with his family through the children of Dan Markel. And I don't think that this reaction was appropriate. It was admonished, and they basically were told by the judge, you can't be having these emotions. And so, once again, Judge Everett just basically being amazing and awesome. He's on my top list of judges. Watching trials, you see some great judges, you see some really bad judges, you see some scandalous judges. And Judge Everett is a great judge. He runs the courtroom well. He has a good sense of humor. I like Judge Everett a lot, and I do think that his admonishments were appropriate, and being annoyed with wasting the jury's time and having emotional outbursts in a way. It's just not appropriate, and especially with Donna. It's like, if she's trying to manipulate the jury and make it sympathetic and seem like she cares, that's not proper. We need this to be based on evidence. You can't try and have these courtroom theatrics. And, in one of the emails from Donna to Wendi around the time of the murder, this implication was made essentially as like, Wendi, you're a great actress. You're going to have to act, and her having these crocodile tears, in my opinion, and doing all this, potentially when hearing that email later in the trial, it could ring back to the jurors, like, look at her putting on this act, so it's just not appropriate. It's not evidence, and she could be trying to influence the jury with her emotional reaction. So I'm glad that Judge Everett said no more emotional outbursts here. And so with that, let's look at, the non-graphic images that were actually displayed here to us, the public watching the stream, that was essentially making Donna emotional in the courtroom. Here are some of the photos that were published. You see the busted out car window. You see the inside of the back seat of the car. You see how the glass fell onto the ground. And what struck me the most is you see the glasses blown in half. And that is really just emotional. It's, you'll see where the bullet was lodged in the next set of images in Dan Markel's head. And he was essentially shot right in his forehead, and it blew his glasses in half. That's just absolutely heartbreaking. It indicates to me that he was looking at the killer and as he got shot, and that's just so sad. And the back seat is also a stark reminder that he was being followed, and it was intentional that the kids were not present. They were dropped off at daycare. And what's very, very incriminating in this case for especially Wendi Adelson, but also for Donna, as she is downstream from all of this and was called by Wendi Adelson in this interview, is that when Wendi Adelson was originally going with the detectives to speak with them right after Dan Markel's attempted murder and eventual murder, because at the time he was suffering in the hospital and then it appeared he was not going to make it, Wendi Adelson had not only tried to go down that street, saw the police presence and the tape up and everything like that, but now had heard that there was a homicidal attack on her ex-husband and did not show the proper fear or care about her children in that moment, by many people's opinions, including my own. When you watch her interview with the detectives, it's very disjointed as to how she could potentially know that her boys were going to be okay, because they intentionally needed this to happen while the boys were away from Dan Markel, because the trauma would be unacceptable to do this in front of the boys. It could have very, very different circumstances in this murder for hire. It would have to be done without the boys there, obviously. So the fact that by many people's opinions, Wendi Adelson was not concerned enough with what could have happened to the boys or where the boys were, even when just driving down that street and seeing police tape anywhere near where your boys may have been, having a missed call from the father that morning. Like, you could be automatically thinking that something could have happened to your children. It's almost as if, in mine and many other people's opinions, that Wendi knew that the boys were okay because they intentionally set it up that way. So this image of the back seat with the car seats and the, looking like a kid's back seat by this father who wanted his children is just so heartbreaking, and just a stark reminder as to what was at stake in this murder for hire. And so this is the initial scene. This is what they found, and then we have some more medical type evidence here on this next slide. You'll see the x-ray that was presented to the jury of Dan Markel, where the bullets are lodged in his head. You see one right in the middle of his skull and brain, and then you also see the two pieces that fragmented around his cheekbone. This is an image of one of the bullets that was actually extracted from Dan Markel. This is basically the stuff that was getting Donna Adelson emotional, as well as some images of Dan Markel after this tragic incident. And we don't have anything too serious. We do have an image of his arm up close of stippling here on the next slide, but nothing too graphic. I don't believe that her, emotional reaction to all this was proper, like I said, but it is very damning to see the consequences of the actions of this murder for hire plot so clearly, like you can see it lit up on this x-ray. And so with that, let's get to the other image evidence that was presented. So we see the window close up where it looks like the bullet may have actually made that little curve right there, that little hole that it blew through. And you see the lens of the glasses that fell out of the frame. You also see stippling on Dan Markel's arm. And very suspiciously, you see the bullet bourbon that was purchased by Wendi as she was trying to take a quote unquote shortcut to this liquor store down the street of Dan Markel's home. And notice the police tape and everything happening right after the murder, which many people have said, because of the route being suspicious and unnecessary, this was Wendi checking on the scene of the crime to ensure that it had happened. Again, that's just everyone's speculation, but it is also my opinion. It is weird that she has the bullet bourbon on the day that Dan Markel was indeed killed by being shot with a bullet, as you saw on the previous screen. There are way too many little coincidences in this case, like the TV repairman, the code for the potential murder for hire, the bullet bourbon the day of. Donna Adelson has indicators of these little codes and these nuances and coincidences that lead to the mountain of circumstantial evidence against her in this case. The last thing I'd like to quickly touch on, and it's not like a fully legally sound statement or argument or theory in any way, but everyone does know that juries are made up of humans, and there are even subconscious impressions that can be made on jurors, and they can make, snap judgments on people based on different biases or things that they believe as jurors that may not have ever been thought of or brought up in jury selection. So one thing that I feel like you can't ignore it, you just cannot miss it, is that Donna and her attorney resemble each other so much. Like, same stature, their features, their hair is similar. It is uncanny, and that might sound superficial, but juries, like I said, they're made up of people, and people are visual and have subconscious, conclusions that they come to based on these visual indicators that they have of attorneys, their clients, and anyone, the witnesses, anyone. But it's very important for the attorneys. And so on the surface, maybe you would think this resemblance could potentially work in Donna's favor. Maybe subconsciously aligns them in some way, and it could soften Donna and make her look maybe less isolated, like some crazy matriarch who decided to kill her daughter's ex-husband. But on the flip side of that, it could make her lawyer feel like just an extension of Donna. And if the subconscious, thoughts of Donna for the jury is that she's a lying, manipulative, cold-hearted witch, then the thoughts and feelings that could be made about Donna could be extended to her attorney based on this uncanny resemblance. Maybe her being Donna's twin makes it less like she's a professional advocate and more just an extension, and risks not humanizing Donna in any way. And so, because you never really see such an uncanny resemblance between an attorney and their client, I felt like this is something that needed to be mentioned because I couldn't get over it. I just feel like you're seeing Donna's sister up there representing her. And I feel like that is probably more risky and less beneficial than it would be helpful. It's so uncanny to me that I felt I needed to point it out. So let's just say that. Thank you so much if you've made it this far in this video. If you're interested in following cases like this or the Alexei Treviso case, which is going to oral argument September 4th, please subscribe as I'll be covering it all along the way with a legal focus. It's Cheeto Friday. I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.